Today, we are here at Gabriel Rosenstock's house to interview. He has translated the Tamil THIRUVALLUVAR into Irish. Now, let's go meet him. Diagwich,
Ysmryd,
Cynnes y Tatu,
Almega Marks, the photos.
Adira Sanam Dun.
Ysmryd.
We would like to gather your insights on the THIRUVALLUVAR translation. During the THIRUVALLUVAR book launch event, you mentioned your desire to respectfully touch the feet of the esteemed master THIRUVALLUVAR. Could you kindly share the reason or inspiration behind this gesture?
Well, should I do it again?
Please. Yeah.
I have noticed that it is a tradition in India, it's not a tradition here, to touch the feet or kiss the feet of an important personage, such as a guru. And I like the gesture, you know, it's a very interesting gesture. In the life of Jesus, for instance, we saw that Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. So it's an act of humility and an act of showing respect. It's not done in Ireland. You'd be arrested if you started going around kissing people's feet here. But I like the notion. I wrote a poem about another holy man from India called Meher Baba, and he even kissed the feet of lepers. So that would seem to us to be almost a disgusting idea here in the West. But when your heart is full of nothing but goodness, then you don't make distinctions between people, whether they are lepers or not, whether they're so-called good people or bad people. But with a good person, with a person who personifies, let's say, universal wisdom and universal love, to kiss that person's feet or to touch that person's feet seems like the right gesture.
Owen McCarthy from Trinity College's Irish and Celtic Languages Department contacting you in relation to the book. Had you ever heard of the THIRUVALLUVARs before?
To my horror and to my shame, I had not. And I thought I was quite familiar with a lot of Indian literature, from the Vedas and the Upanishads all the way through to modern times. I've translated a lot of Indian literature, or I should say transcreated, because not knowing the original language, you can't say translate really. But I've translated such works as, let's say, the Ashtavakra Gita, which many people think is the supreme Gita or wisdom book in India. But you have to be ready to understand it and ready to pick up its very, very powerful message. And not everybody is ready in this lifetime. It might take a few lifetimes to be ready to understand what's going on in the Ashtavakra Gita. I have friends as well in India, among the literary community, whose poetry I have translated. For instance, there's a poet called K. Satchidanandan who writes in Malayalam. I've translated his poems. There's a poet in Mumbai called Dilip Javeri, and he writes in Gujarati. I've translated his poems. Also in Mumbai, there's a poet called Hemant Divate. He writes in Marathi. I've translated his poems. And earlier on, I translated a book into Irish by Rabindranath Tagore, the Bengali Nobel laureate, who was actually a friend of our own Nobel laureate, William Butler Yeats. And I was at the unveiling of the bust, the statue, to Tagore in Stephen's Green, here in Dublin, a number of years ago, on the 150th anniversary of the birth of Tagore. And that was a book called Stray Birds in the Stray. And it's still in print, so look that up, you might like that one. I admit that I was not familiar with this great work before Owen McCorrig asked me on behalf of the Tamil Academy to do an Irish version. Now let me tell you, I think we need another Irish version. What do I mean by that? I think that we need a version of this great book in Irish for children, a special children's edition. I'm sure that exists. You have children's editions of the Bible and children's edition of the Gita, the Bhagavad Gita, and other things. So I'd say it might be possible to do a children's version of this work. It would mean perhaps simplifying the language a bit, maybe not using it all, shortening it, to take the points that are most relevant and most easily grasped by children, maybe from the ages of 8 to 12, that age group, And I'd be interested in doing that if it were possible. It could be illustrated. It could be a very delightful little book. So that's something to think about.
Could you please share any sentiments that arose within you while transcreating the Thirukkurals into the Irish language?
Well, I've become very interested in the book. It's a book that one could read every day and learn something new from it. I was inspired just the other day to write a poem about his wife. Yes, your wife. She was called Vasuka, isn't that correct? And she, Vasuki, yeah? And she, there's a story that Vasuki baked some sand and it turned into fragrant rice. So the poem I've written for Vasuki is a poem which says, please cook more sand so that we can feed the starving children in Palestine. Yeah. So he and his good wife have inspired one poem so far. But getting back to when I was actually translating or transcreating this wonderful book, not everything in it is relevant to today's political setup or political thinking. I think when it comes to what you might call moral behavior, it's very sound as to how we should behave in life, to be just people, fair people, loving people, conscientious people, thinking people. He does all that. But when it comes to the politics, let's have a look at this. Raniri láidech an na spéidech an tacht sláán is sin is le báisteach. Mailen an pobl agus iad a breanhain áde rí lacht de cheanere agus iad a súil le cochram le féinehig. Now what that says is that we look to the sky when we're planning if rain is coming, and we look to the king with his symbols of power when we need to have justice in society or to learn of just decisions from him when problems arise. Now, I don't particularly share that point of view because I'm afraid I don't trust politicians in the same way that people could trust a good king in ancient times, when in fact they loved their leader because of his wisdom and because he took care of the people and loved the people. But today I think you have a lot of selfish politicians in many countries. They're even within the politics, not just of worldly events, they're in the politics of church and religions as well. I just saw on the television the other night that a cardinal in the Vatican has been imprisoned for embezzlement. He stashed away a couple of million for himself. So even people in the highest office are prone to corruption because too much power can lead to greed. Yeah? And greed means, too much interest in money and maybe in ways of getting money dishonestly. So the trust that the people of Tamil Nadu had in their king was obviously something that he was worthy of their respect and their love and so on. But times change, things go in cycles. And I think in India you call that now the Kali Yuga, that this is an age still of destruction, and that we don't know, I don't know how long more we have to wait for the dawning of a new age, but please God it'll come. And then we can, as I said in this Quran, we can respect our leaders and love our leaders again. But at the moment, I'm keeping an eye open, to see how they behave.
From your perspective, would you consider the Thirukkurals to be a philosophical work, a moral guide, or a book on life ethics?
Good question. It may be all of these things. It may be like Confucius, a moral guide, not just for the individual, but for society. And especially in countries where there are big populations like China and India, I suppose you need a type of Confucian mind to regulate society in a way that people function without aggression. It's not easy to advise anybody, to tell you the truth, because in all of us there's a bit of a rebel. I'm a bit of a rebel, I can tell you that much, and I don't take the teachings of others perhaps as seriously as I should. But there's one thing that I've learned from Indian culture, from visiting India, and that is humility, which I mentioned earlier on, and respect. You can see in the body language and the gestures of most Indian people a respect for the other. When a guest comes into a restaurant or into a house, the person greeting the guest will say, "The guest is God." This is a wonderful attitude to have. Wonderful attitude. And it will be in this book as well, that type of, if you like, respect, for the need to respect oneself and the other. I think you'll find this here.
Given your extensive experience in reading various literatures from around the globe and translating them into Irish, what were your heartfelt impressions, thoughts, or feelings upon reading the Thirukkurals?
It's very comprehensive, It covers so many aspects of the outer life and the inner life. And it ends up with the most beautiful chapter of all on love, which is very poetic. I mean, sometimes you have a lawgiver like Moses, and he gives you the 10 Commandments, and he says, do not kill, and do not this, and do not that. It's not very poetic. But this man had poetic abilities, poetic insights, ways of finding metaphors to explain, the complexity of the human nature, which is not just intellectual and spiritual, it's also emotional. So we're complex creatures, and this man was complex too, and he understood the complexity of human nature. But what a prophet does, what a sage does, what a poet does, is to try to express these complex issues in ways that are understandable and eternal. And I think this is eternal wisdom, apart maybe from the politics.
Do you think the Thiruvalluvar encapsulated all the ethics of life within the span of 1,330 kurals?
I do, as I say, I think it's a universal, comprehensive text. And you can open it at random and look at any page. This one says, compálnach na mógachta íal údíocht. Companion to pride is humility, you know. If you are proud of your achievements, and you should be, that doesn't mean you shouldn't be humble. You must also be humble. So he reminds us of that. And it may seem obvious to some, but it's not obvious to all. There's a lot of people out there who are very proud of their achievements and who have no humility at all. And that's not good. Humility brings us closer to God, closer to the truth. Pride can lead us away from that contact with the truth and that contact with the human heart, with the other person, you know. I remember going into one of these little rice boats they use in Kerala to cruise the backwaters, you know. All the tourists do that. It's a lovely thing to do once anyway. And the boatman said, watch your head going in the door. It was pretty low, you know. I said, what's this about? Are the people around here very small or something? He said, no, Mr. Gabriel. When you go into our boat, you must bow your head in respect, and that's why it's that low. I thought, that's very interesting, you know. Not just walk in like that, but before you go in, now you're in, you know. It's lovely. That's culture, right? This is culture. This is a book about the culture of a people, and a lot of people from other cultures can learn from it. When I was your age or slightly older, I was interested in what's called anthropology. Anthropology is the study of man, the study of culture. And I read a fair bit of anthropology. People like Margaret Mead, she was an American anthropologist. There were brothers from Brazil who were very interesting. And that changed my way of looking and writing. It changed me as a poet, because I began to think, you know, people have different cultural traditions. Not everybody in the world thinks the same way about time, for instance. I haven't worn a watch in 50 years. Never had a mobile phone. I don't know what time it is. Don't care. I'm retired now. I don't have to look at the watch. But people think differently about such things, about time, about space, about everything you can think of, about food. Look at all the prejudices about food and all the things that are banned. Look at the way, you know, eating habits, you know, using a chopstick, all this kind of stuff. So that's what anthropology is about. All the different cultural variations of the different types of experience we as human beings can have on this small planet. Incredible amount of differences. But the real secret is in books of wisdom like this to show what we have in common. Yeah? In other words, it doesn't matter if you're male or female, black or white or yellow, your spirit is undifferentiated. You know, the self cannot be divided into these categories by which we divide customs and habits of people.
In your opinion, can only human beings be related to the Thirukkural, or is it meant for all living beings?
Other than human beings?
Yeah, like animals.
Oh. You see, I remember coming across a phrase once in Buddhist circles, and it was, does the dog have Buddha nature? Now, this is a question that's hardly understood in the West. it's perhaps more easily understood in Oriental countries. Now, the respect, for instance, shown to the cow in India is something not easily understood in the West either. But yes, these animals are sentient beings. They have feelings and perceptions and degrees of understanding. And when you see, for instance, in Ireland, the way some animals are treated, it's not right, especially cattle that are exported live in ships, they're often in boats. They're often treated a bit roughly. This is a pity because at one stage India and Ireland shared the same culture in some respects when it came to the cow. And the words are similar. For instance, in Irish it's bo, and in Hindi, I believe, and Sanskrit it's go. Yeah? So they're quite similar. Our sacred river in Ireland is called Boyne, the Boyne, and that's related to the Sanskrit word Govinda. And these things both are related to a fair cow. Yeah? So this is an ancient Indo-European tradition. That is to say, there are many words in Irish, and in Sanskrit that really came from the same what's called Indo-European pool. And my understanding is that at the end of the Ice Age, some tribes went this way and some tribes went that way, but they brought with them a lot of the same words and the same ideas, and then over time these changed as languages and dialects change and so on. But I'll tell you how important, for instance, the word bow or cow is in Ireland. The Irish for a road is bóthar, and that means bow or row. It's wide enough for one cow to pass another, you see? And you'll still find that root bow in place names, even here in Dublin. And if you don't know Irish, you'll never suspect that the word bow is there. Booterstown is Ballinvohar, the town of the road. Booter, there's no such thing as booter. It's a corruption of bóthar, a road, bóthar vo, something that's wide enough for one cow to pass another. Now, I just opened a chapter here at random called Cordis, chapter 79, Cordis, Friendship. You have friends. This book reminds us of the importance of friendship, and we have a proverb in Irish which says, Is mahan scahan sul carrot. A mirror, the eye of a friend is a good mirror. So you look into a mirror and you see what you look like. But if you look at the eye of a friend, that friend will tell you a lot about you as well. That the way the friend looks at you, with respect or with suspicion, or I don't like what he's doing now, or I don't like what he's saying now, or with love, or with compassion, or whatever. So, in a sense, what this book encapsulates is not just the thoughts of this great sage, but a lot of folk wisdom too. And we can find this folk wisdom in Proverbs, right? So that's the proverb I just told you. It's mahan scahan sul carrot. A friend's eye is a good mirror. These things are being neglected today because they're part of, if you like, folk culture and oral traditions, and they're being neglected and they're being replaced by rubbish, I'm afraid. Not a lot of rubbish out there.
In your view, are the THIRUKKURAL straightforward and easy to understand, or do you have to read between the lines to understand them?
I believe that we never read the same thing twice. There's always some extra dimension. If we come back and read something again the following day, we find something new in it. There was a Greek philosopher called Heraclitus, and he said, you never step into the same river twice. That's an interesting concept. But some poems, you can read them all your life, but as you change, your understanding of the poem, your feeling about the poem will change, as you know more about life. But I think it's a very good thing to learn poetry off by heart. One could learn chorales off by heart as well. And you don't need to know the full meaning of them now, but at some stage, the meaning will dawn on you. If it's there in your heart. We say to learn something by heart, not by mind, to learn it by heart. If you learn something by heart, the beauty of the poem and the meaning of the poem will slowly, seep through over time. And you will get a great reward from reading immortal literature, immortal poetry. You get a great reward in this life when you have these emotions and these ideals in your heart. And the way to cherish them is poetry, because poetry can be so attractive. The music of poetry, the rhythms of poetry, the sound of poetry, I'm sorry for people who don't read poetry, who don't enjoy poetry. I'm sorry for them,
What was your first thought when you started the transcreation work? What was the challenges you had to overcome?
I must remind myself to be humble now, as the book says, but I've been translating all my life. I'm what's called a poet translator. Not every translator is a poet, not every poet is a translator, but I'm a poet translator. So that means that, you dive into it like you dive into a pool and you start swimming, and you find a rhythm. And then you just continue like that because if you have the technique of swimming, you continue like that, okay? If you have the technique of translating, you just continue like that automatically almost, sometimes almost spontaneously. The words come. You're a fire with inspiration. There are two ways of looking at inspiration. One is the Latin way, from the word inspirare. It's like a breath from the heavens, yeah? The other way is that you're on fire with inspiration, and that's an Irish word, tinne, and tinne is a fire. So whether it's the breath or the fire of inspiration, whichever way you want to look at it, that's the energy that keeps you going, yeah? So somebody who is not a poet translator would have problems with this or with any other book. You'd be saying, how am I going to translate this? But a poet translator knows immediately by just tuning in to what kind of book this is. So really, the more I progressed, and of course, the easier it became, until I came to the chapter on love, and that was really the highlight for me, because that was the most poetic part of the book as well.
Which curl from the 1,330 THIRUVALLUVAR is your favorite, and what makes it your favorite?
Well, now, can you give me a moment? In the love choral, number 1126 is highly remarkable. I haven't seen lines like this anywhere before. This is very, very delicate, very, very beautiful. It says, Shushe, ni imin she riv huilische, ni chochem sul agel gngortoile. And it means, she says, he is never gone from my eyes. I don't want to blink in case I hurt him. That is incredible, The greatest love poet in the world would be jealous of those lines. There's the loved one in her eye, and she won't blink in case she hurts him. That is very delicate, very sensitive, very refined, very human, very loving, and very beautifully spoken. As I say, any poet would give his right eye for that poem. Yeah, wonderful girl. And I think it shows him in the full light of humanity, because an important ability in a poet, in the man that he was, is not just to think like a man, but to think like a woman as well, like a child. And that is the true gift of poetry. Because when a poet can have that type of insight into the mind of a woman, or the mind of a child, or the mind of an animal, we talked about animals earlier on, and to have that sympathy and understanding, and to be able to think like a woman just for that few moments, that's the outstanding imaginative gift that is given to poets, to be able to do that. And actually, if you look at a lot of problems in society, in relationships, when there's an abusive relationship, for instance, that is the man's inability to think like a woman. When divorce and things like that happen, and they're a curse to society, in my view, when these things happen, that's basically the inability of the man to think like a woman. If he could think like a woman, as in this chorale, he could not hurt his partner. He could not leave his partner. Keep his partner in his eye and dare not blink in case he hurt her. Yeah?
And have you ever written a poem for your wife?
I have.
What was the poem called?